Something quiet is happening in North America again. Not in oil markets, not in airlines, and not even in factories. This time, the shift is happening in something far more ordinary: potatoes.
Canada is working to expand trade with Mexico as the two countries sign a trade memorandum of understanding.
And yet, the implications could ripple across the entire North American food system. This week, Canada's food regulator, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, confirmed a new agreement with Mexico that will allow fresh Canadian potatoes to be exported directly into the Mexican market. At first glance, it sounds like a routine agricultural update, but when you look closer, it reveals a deeper shift in how trade across North America is beginning to evolve. For decades, Canada's potato exports have followed a very predictable pattern. The overwhelming majority flowed south into the United States. In fact, recent trade data shows that about 93% of Canada's fresh potato exports and roughly 92% of its total potato exports have historically gone to the US market. That dominance shaped the entire agricultural supply chain. Farmers in provinces like Prince Edward Island, Manitoba, and Alberta grew potatoes knowing their primary customer was across the border. Processing plants turned huge portions of those potatoes into frozen fries and packaged products destined for American supermarkets and restaurants. The system was efficient, integrated, and stable, but that stability is beginning to change. Under a new agreement between the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Mexico's Agricultural Authority, fresh Canadian potatoes will finally be allowed into Mexico for both consumption and processing. For years, this trade barely existed, not because Canada lacked supply and not because Mexico lacked demand. The real barrier was regulatory: differences in phytosanitary standards, the strict plant health rules that govern agricultural imports. Those rules simply didn't match between the two countries. Now they do, and that single regulatory change opens the door to an entirely new market. Mexico represents a massive opportunity. With a population of more than 130 million people, it is one of the largest and fastest growing food markets in the Western Hemisphere. Until now, Canada's presence in that market was extremely limited. In the 2024 to 2025 trade year, Canada exported around 55,526 tons of frozen potatoes to Mexico, worth approximately $77.7 million, according to Statistics Canada. But fresh table potatoes, the kind sold directly to consumers or used by processors, were almost non-existent. In other words, a large agricultural market right next door remained mostly untapped. That is now changing. The agreement effectively harmonizes health standards between Canada and Mexico, allowing Canadian growers to finally compete in that market. Mexican retailers, distributors, and processors will now be able to evaluate Canadian potato varieties, sizes, and quality for their own supply chains. And if demand develops, Canadian farmers suddenly gain a second major export destination within North America. This shift also comes at a time when the political environment surrounding trade has grown increasingly uncertain. Since returning to office, US President Donald Trump has revived tariff threats and trade pressure across multiple industries. Even when tariffs are not directly applied to a product, the broader atmosphere of trade tension can make countries rethink how dependent they are on any single market. For Canada's agricultural sector, the numbers show just how concentrated that dependency has been. When more than 9 out of every 10 fresh potatoes are exported to one country, any disruption, political or economic, carries real risk. Economists often say that when trade relationships become uncertain, countries begin to diversify. They search for new markets, new buyers, and new supply routes that reduce reliance on a single partner. That appears to be exactly what Canada is beginning to do. Instead of relying almost exclusively on the United States, it is gradually opening the door to Mexico and potentially other global markets as well. And there is another interesting layer to this shift. Mexico is not just a consumer market. It is also a major food processing hub. Many global snack and food companies operate large production facilities there, including the American multinational PepsiCo, which produces one of the world's most recognizable snack brands, Lay's. Those factories require enormous quantities of potatoes to produce chips, fries, and other processed foods. If Canadian potatoes begin entering Mexican supply chains in larger volumes, it could subtly reshape the agricultural sourcing behind those products. Instead of relying primarily on American potato farms, some processors could begin sourcing part of their supply from Canada. This agreement represents a subtle but important step in the evolution of North American trade. For years, the continent's agricultural system appeared tightly integrated under free trade agreements. Yet in reality, many products, especially food and textiles, remained surrounded by exceptions, regulations, and hidden barriers. Now, some of those barriers are slowly being removed, and when barriers disappear, trade flows begin to move. Sometimes slowly, sometimes dramatically, but almost always quietly at first. Canada is not abandoning the American market. The United States will remain its largest agricultural trading partner for the foreseeable future. But what this agreement shows is something more strategic. Canada is expanding its options. Instead of depending on a single destination for the majority of its potato exports, it is opening access to a second major market just to the south. And that quiet diversification could mark the beginning of a broader shift in North American trade, one where supply chains become less concentrated, markets become more competitive, and economic relationships gradually rebalance. All triggered by something most people would never expect: a regulatory agreement, a new export route, and millions of potatoes that, until now, almost never crossed that border.